What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of The Sit Down. As always, if you enjoy this exclusive video, please make sure you hit the like button and let me know what you think of today's very interesting discussion in the comment section below. If you're new around here, you just haven't done it yet, or you're living under a rock and seeing this video for the first time, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another sit down video. Also, if you enjoy cigars, check out our signature sit down cigar available now from Pravada Cigar Club. The link to buy is in the pinned comment of this video. Happy Saturday, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the show. I'm your host, Jeff Nadeau. Let's get into another very interesting organized crime topic. And in September of 2023, Joseph Big Joey Massino would die at the age of 80. In my career covering organized crime, one of the most interesting people in the life is the larger-than-life Bonanno boss, a man who throughout his career would ascend to the top of the Bonanno crime family and for years had one of the more powerful families in New York City. By the late 90s, the Bonannos were the only family in New York without any cooperators, and they were powerful. But eventually, as we know, the family would crack and crumble, and a lot of it was due to the defection of Joseph Massino. The question, though, over the last 10 to 15 years is, what was Joe Massino's life like in hiding? Today, we're going to tell you what it was like. Over the last couple of weeks, I've developed someone very close to Joe Massino, and they have given me some truly fascinating information about the life of Joe Massino after the Mafia, all the way leading up to his death in 2023. The story next on Sit Down Shorts. Before we get in to the life of Joe Massino, it's important to understand Joe Massino was only on the street as a free man for about 10 years. But I want to talk a little bit about the details that led up to his eventual cooperation and how it all went down. I understand the first couple of minutes of this video may be information that you already know, but it's important to provide context. And we'll get to some really interesting details here in just a second. I do want to say some people will ask who the source of this information is. Just understand it is a very trusted yet secret source that I've been chatting with over the last couple of weeks. This person may at some point discuss this more, but I wasn't willing to pry very much further. I feel it was a good source, and it's really interesting information, and I want to share it with you. Joe Massino was originally arrested in January of 2023. As we know, his trial would eventually begin on 11 RICO counts, including several murders, arson, extortion, loan sharking, gambling, and money laundering. The trial would begin in May of 2004. Now, the trial would include a death penalty case and Massino essentially planning the murder of Gerlando George from Canada, Shasha, a Canadian individual who was a Bonanno made member and high up with ties to Montreal. As we know, Shasha was murdered in 1999. Now, for Massino, this was the worst of his possible fates due to the fact that if he were found and convicted, he could get the death penalty. I think it's important to understand the level of what a federal death penalty means to someone. A lot of people don't realize that the federal government does have a death penalty. Keep in mind, currently in America, 40 individuals are facing the death penalty. And a lot of people believe that if you get the death penalty, you're never going to get executed, which is actually untrue. In fact, the United States has executed nearly 1,500 people since the 90s. And in 20 and 21, under the Trump administration, the federal government actually did a lot of execution. So just because you are slated for execution doesn't mean, like in some states, you may never get it. At the federal level, They definitely do execute people, and it really comes down to the administration that's in office. Understand that if Joe Massino was convicted and got the death penalty, his existence would have been absolutely horrific. He would have been placed at a United States penitentiary or ADMEX facility, and his life would be cordoned off to a small box. So for Joe Massino, the stakes were very high. Ultimately, Massino had to face the fact that he was facing very serious charges, but everyone around him, including former people under him like Frank Coppa, as well as many others, including his brother-in-law, Salvatore Vitali, were all flipping against him. In the end, Massino, as we know, on July 30th, 2004, would be found guilty on all 11 counts. Almost immediately upon his conviction, it was said he asked for an inside chamber meeting with Judge Nicholas Garifas. At that point, it was discussed that Joseph Massino decided he was going to cooperate for the federal government. Now, a lot of people wonder what was it exactly that made Joe Massino cooperate? And in my opinion, it was probably three different reasons, and they all played an important part. One of which was the fact that Joe Massino had to realize he would likely get the death penalty. Nobody wants to die like that. When you are a death penalty case, as I just alluded to, you don't hang around with everybody else. You are essentially in segregation and you wait for a death. It's pretty simple. And you were in the worst penitentiaries in this country. Number two, if Joe Massino cooperated, his wife and family could keep the many assets that they had, including their home in Howard Beach, as well as money and other assets. So Massino believed that he may never get to see his family as a free man again. However, he wanted the family and three daughters that he had to live with some sort of means. Now, many people believe, including the individual that wrote the book on Joe Massino, Tony DiStefano, that Massino likely also cooperated due to the fact that everyone around him that he had been close to decided to flip. In all, by the early 2010s, 13 people in the Bonanno crime family would cooperate against the family and other families. Why he did it, I guess we'll never actually know, but there were a lot of reasons as to why he should. The old thought is, if you do the crime, you should do the time. But for Joe Massino, the truth of the matter was he was going to do time a lot different than many, facing the fact that the federal government decided when he would die. And with his many health issues as well, that wasn't going to be an option. Now, Massino would eventually be sent to prison. Keep in mind, he had been found guilty, though the thought was when he cooperated, he would get some time served and be released due to the fact that he cooperated and helped the government. We wouldn't see Massino again until 2011. So between 2004 and 2011, Joe Massino was ferried off around the country to various prisons that I'll get into in just a second. We actually wouldn't see Massino again until the 2011 trial of Vincent Vinny Gorgeous Basciano for the murder of Randolph Pizzola, in which Massino would be the star witness. He would eventually also testify at the trial of Anthony Romanello, a Genovese heavyweight. Keep in mind, it was discussed that Massino had no real dealings with Romanello, but he was brought in as a, quote, organized crime expert. Now, throughout the nearly 10 years in prison that Massino would face, he would do his time at FCI Farrington in New Jersey, which is a very well-known federal WITSEC unit. Keep in mind, they also have other units, but they have one exclusive unit for WITSEC individuals. He was also housed at one point at the Federal Correctional Institution at Mariana in Florida, which is also known as a dropout yard. In 2013, July of that year, Joseph Massino would be sentenced to time served and released from federal prison. Now, what I'm about to get into is exclusive information provided only by this show. According to a source very close to Joseph Massino, he would only live in one location over the last 10 years, other than the last month of his life, which I'll get into. Massino was sent to Cleveland, Ohio, and would live in a southern suburb of Cleveland. Now, during his time, he was only in the witness protection program for about 6 months. According to my source, in January of 2014, Joseph Massino willingly left the witness protection program. However, he would keep the new name that he was given, and he tried to blend in to leafy and suburb like Ohio. It was said that Joseph Massino lived very quietly and alone. He would only see his family several times. And it was said that he had one friend close to him who acted as a driver and a confidant, if you will. Now, it is unclear if the individual with Joe Massino knew who he exactly was. In the witness protection program or after the witness protection program, Joseph Massino lived under the name Ralph Rogers, and he lived in a 55 and over community near Cleveland. I want to get into some other pretty interesting particulars about Massino's life living alone in Ohio. It was said that regularly before the coronavirus pandemic, Joe Massino enjoyed going to a casino close to his home and playing slots and other table games. It was also said that he attended mass regularly. I was told by my source that Massino also had a mid-2000s Mercury Grand Marquis described as, quote, a boat, and that he, quote, loved the vehicle. Now, what I'm also about to get into, there's no secret Joe Massino enjoyed eating. He had a catering company called J&S Cake. He had a restaurant called Casablanca. Many people remember that in Maspeth, Queens. And as we know, Massino was a portly individual. That's why they called him Big Joey. We know he enjoyed good food. But what I found out about his dietary habits in Ohio were quite interesting. It was said, and this is a true story. I know many people will relate this to The Sopranos, where Tony makes the joke that you should check out a TGI Fridays. He loves their wings, in reference to Salvatore Big Pussy Bompin' Sarah. According to the source that I have, Massino enjoyed going to Ruby Tuesday and TGI Fridays, which are both chain restaurants that are quite on the decline. Now, I will say this. When I was a kid, I used to love Ruby Tuesdays. We have to admit, that salad bar was pretty great. Now, I'm not sure how much salad Joe Massino was eating, but he enjoyed it. Now, it was also discussed by the source that Joe Massino enjoyed a fancy dinner, that he would call it, and I would think maybe brought him back a little bit to his life before hiding. He would go to a place called the Timber Lodge, which is in Medina, Ohio, a southern suburb not far from his home, where he would enjoy steaks, pasta, seafood, and other American delicacies. Now, it's unknown what he enjoyed eating there. However, I looked at their menu, and it seems like any other really just nice restaurant in a small town in America. Now, Joe Massino lived in secret, at least in the witness protection program, for under a year. But the 9 or so years that he was on the street, he did not live in the witness protection program. It was said, though, that he used the name Ralph Rogers. And I have heard that he was recognized several times, but he just generally would say, I'm Ralph Rogers. I don't know who. Someone even mentioned the name Joe Massino, and he, quote, said he didn't know who that was. But he, for the most part, lived a free man. Now, over the last 6 months of Massino's life in 2023, it was said that his health problems got worse and worse. Keep in mind, at the time of his death, he was 80 years old. And Joe Massino had battled obesity for a long period of time and had diabetes as well as other health issues. It was said he would be brought back to the area of New York. However, he would not go to his home in Queens because I think for him, he probably thought it wouldn't be safe. Not for him, but for his family. and he would actually be entered into a health facility in Glen Cove, Long Island. Massino would pass away on September 14th, 2023. From what I understand, he is buried in a cemetery in New York, and there was a lot of trouble in getting him buried. The truth is, what a lot of people need to remember is most Catholic churches and parishes will not bury someone associated with the mafia. This is very normal in not only this country, but also in Italy. You have to go through all sort of hoops to get someone buried. It was said that around 50 to 75 people came to the funeral of Joseph Massino. I was able to get a prayer card from his service. And from what I understand, that photo was taken about 20 years ago. So there you go. Some good investigative work by me, I guess. Hopefully, maybe you learned some things. I sure did. I had a conversation with someone for nearly 2 hours. We've talked off and on. And I have to say, it was one of the more fascinating things that I was privileged to learn. Yeah, Joe Massino is a really interesting, enigmatic figure. He's a guy who I think, regardless of your stance on cooperation, he was the first boss to ever do so. And a lot of people wondered, what was his life like over the last 10 years? I do want to end this. A lot of people will probably ask me in the comment section, did Joe Massino have any connection or chats with Salvatore Vitale? As far as I know, they never spoke. In fact, I don't think either know where each other are even. So as far as I know, they never spoke. Now, I will make it clear, I don't and have the exact amount of times Massino saw his family, but as far as I know, he lived alone in Ohio. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you enjoyed it, please make sure you let me know what you think of it in the comments below. Hopefully, we can try to get you more really interesting information regarding Massino and other people. The truth is, once they leave and aren't in the spotlight anymore, it's quite interesting. Could you imagine living in a suburb of Ohio and going to a casino and you look to your left and you see Big Joey Massino? Be quite interesting. I think we can all say that. We'll see you next week here on The Sit Down.